Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to teach you about useState hook. I have here a very simple component. Right now, it renders only the text up. So let's start by adding a simple variable here. I'm going to say here let fruit is equal to apple. Then here I'm going to say h1 and I'm going to show the fruit here. And below this variable, I'm going to add a button. I'm going to say here add fruit. And this button is going to have on click event, which is going to call a function called change value. So now let's define this function here. Const change value. Fruit is going to be equal to orange. So change that value to orange. And then simply I'm going to console log the fruit below like this. Now, if you're using ESLint, you're probably going to see red squiggly lines here. That's fine. I disable it. I just want to demonstrate here first something before we start with the hook. So now if we go to the browser and click on the button, we can see that indeed the fruit was changed to the orange. We can see that in the console, but on the screen, nothing changed. It's important to understand why is this the case. And this has to do with how React renders and re-renders its components. So what React does on a initial render, it creates a structure out of this component. It starts here. It first assigns an apple to the fruit, and then it renders the JSX as HTML. And we can see that on the screen. Once we click on the button, change value function is going to run. And this function is going to change the fruit from apple to orange. Then console log is going to console that value. And this is where the operation stops. And that's why we don't see the change on the screen. We see it in the console, but not on the screen, because we need a way so that when we change the value, we can update the DOM. And this is where re-rendering of the component comes in place. This is where we use useState hook. So let's add it here. First, I'm going to import that hook from React, and then I'm going to add it here. I'm going to say here const, and then we open and close these brackets because this hook returns an array, and we can use now useState. Now, by default, if we leave it like this, React is going to assign undefined as a default value. In this case, I actually want to add here 0 because we are going to count the fruits here. So now we add to this array two things. The first one is the getter variable, the variable which is going to hold this value here. So I'm going to call that variable count. And the second thing this useState hook is going to give us here is the setter function. And again, we can call it however we like. I'm going to call this one set count. Now I can take this count and I can add here h2. Let's show it here. And then I'm going to use this setter function to set count to 1, like this. Now if we come back, reload the page, we can see the initial render, we can see the apple here, and the default value is 0. If I click on the button, we can see that the count was changed to 1, but the fruit stayed as apple, even though we can see again in the console, actually it was changed. So let's try to understand why is this the case and what's going on here. On the initial first render, apple is going to get assigned to the fruit variable. Then React initializes useState hook with its default value, which is 0. And then things are rendered onto the screen. After that, we click on the button, change value function is going to run, and this function is going to change the fruit to orange. And then it's going to run this special set count function. And this set count function is going to change the state to 1. Now, once it changes the state to 1, this function is going to re-render the component. And once React re-renders the component, first React destroys the instance of the app component, and then it creates a new one. So as it creates a new one, again, apple is going to be assigned to the fruit, but the use state is going to stay as it is, as the use state persists through re-renders. So the value is not going to be reinitialized with a 0, rather use state hook keeps its value as the state is located outside of our component. Then everything is rendered onto the screen, and we can see now count 1 and fruit stays as apple. And this is one important difference between the variable and the state, as the variable is going to be reinitialized again and again with every re-render, while state persists through re-renders, meaning when you change the state, it's going to remember its value. Now, because useState persists through re-renders and the count variable holds its value, we can say here count +1 to increment that value. So now if we come back and once you click on the button, you can see that the value is incremented by 1. That's because on each re-render, remember always that useState is going to persist through re-renders, meaning it's going to hold the value, while this variable here is going to be reinitialized as it cannot persist through re-renders. Now, let's take this setCount function and duplicate it. What do you think is going to happen here? You'll probably think that now this function is going to increment the count by 2, not by 1. If we come back here and click on the button, we can see that the count is still incremented by 1. Why is this the case? To understand this, we need to know another very important thing about this setter function here. The setter function is not synchronous. Rather, whenever you call it, it's going to be scheduled to update the state. So when this component initially renders, first the apple is set to the fruit, the use state is initialized with its default value, which is 0, and then things are rendered onto the screen. Then we click on the button, change value function is going to run, and now setCount function is going to be scheduled to update the state, and then the second setCount function is also going to be scheduled to update the state. Now, at the moment when they are scheduled to update the state, they are scheduled with that default value which is present at the moment, which is in this case 0. So we have here 0 plus 1, and then again 0 plus 1. And then somewhere in the future, these two functions are going to run. So the first one runs and it sets the state to 1, and then the second one runs and it sets the state to 1. Now to fix this problem, we can pass here anonymous function, this. And this anonymous function is going to take a previous value. We can call it however we like. I'm going to say here just prev, and then I can say here prev plus 1, like this. And then I'm going to duplicate this, and now we can see that addFruit increments the count by 2, as it should. So this is different because once these two functions are scheduled to update the state, they're not scheduled with the present count value. Rather, they will use the previous value directly from the state. So this is another thing that's important to remember about setCount. Now, another thing we can do here is that we can add different data types to useState hook. For example, we can use objects. So here I'm going to add another state. I'm going to say here fruit state, and the initial value is going to be an object, and this object is going to have a fruit, which is going to be apple by default, and count, which is going to be 0. And now I can remove these two things as I don't need them anymore, and I can say here, because this is now object, I need to say here fruit state.fruit, and then fruit state.count, right? And now once we click on the button, we can update the state. So I can say here, set fruit state, add a new object, and I can say fruit, let's say orange, and then count, let's say 2. Now, if I click on the button, we can see that both values are changed. Now, if you wish to change only one thing on this object, you can use priv here. So we can say here priv, return an object, and then here I'm going to change the count to priv.count plus 1, because the priv now holds the entire object. And the fruit, I want it to stay the same, so I can say here priv. So we're going to spread the values from the priv object, and because we are just changing the count is going to be changed, and this is going to be copied here. So now if we come back and I click on the button, we can see that we are incrementing the count of the fruits, and the fruit stays as the apple. So this is how we use useState with React. If you like the way I teach and you would like to improve yourself as a React developer, I have a professional React developer course. You can find it in the link below. Thank you guys for watching, and have a nice day.